Hexarin here, and welcome to my early access review for Fatekeeper, an action RPG from studio developers Paraglacial and published by THQ Nordic. The early access version has been described as a 2-hour-long demo, but in reality you may wind up with 3 to 4 hours of playtime thanks primarily to how difficult Fatekeeper actually is, as well as a very troublesome first boss encounter, but more on that later. You can pick this up on Steam for around $11 Australian until the 17th of June. At which point it bumps back up to its current pre-sale price of around $14. At the time of making this video, the developers have since released balance patch 0.1.1, which actually aims to address some of the concerns I initially had and raised when I first recorded this review, concerning general player sluggishness, health scarcity, block improvements, buffs to the effects of alchemical reagents, significant nerfs to the first boss encounter, and a UI bug related to persisting subtitles. The developers have already responded to feedback very quickly, which is amazing to see. In Fatekeeper, your character is often referred to as a Watcher, a Druid, or a Sentinel. You are accompanied by your Moran Tor, spirit guide, which has manifested itself as a rat who ushers you along your journey and is capable of somewhat amusing dialogue interactions with the player. The story elements are not yet fully present in a cohesive way in the game's current state, but it seems as though you are in your early stages of initiation as a Watcher, or Druid, with the initial goal of making your way to the temple city in the peaks of Mar Guran, and dealing with the dangers that appear along the way. These come at first in the form of twisted goblinoid creatures that already seem familiar with your order, often mocking you about your predecessor, but also include very light platforming and door puzzles. Right off the bat, the game world is strikingly beautiful. The graphics here are excellent, especially for an early access title, and in terms of performance, the game ran well for me on ultra settings, although I do have a decent setup, so your mileage may vary. Details are in the description. You start the early access adventure with a handful of spells, all capable of a great deal of utility in the way you interact with the game world. You can shoot an orb of flame, which can ignite oil surfaces and set enemies on fire. You can emit a strong gust of wind, sending minor enemies flying into wall spikes, and each other. You can slow and debilitate enemies with ice magic to better position yourself during encounters, and for my personal favorite, telekinesis, which allows you to manipulate objects and enemies alike throughout the world, allowing you to drag your opponents off ledges to their death, destabilize them to allow for an opening in their defense, or simply throw things at them, like a table. The Watcher is also proficient with weapons, and you can find greatswords, axes, clubs, and daggers as you progress. Itemization comes primarily in the form of alchemical ingredients you find scattered throughout the world for use in your potion crafting, weapons of varying types, and the odd piece of armor or jewelry. Gear effects do not seem to be randomized, so loot is static, but does still possess your typical rarities, such as uncommon, rare, and legendary. You are also capable of wearing 8 rings, which I appreciate considering most games cap this at 1 or 2. There seem to be many secrets and hidden treasures throughout the game, often requiring some degree of platforming or a keen eye to spot. There is apparently a legendary weapon or two hidden somewhere in the current version of the game, so keep an eye out. There is a leveling system tied to your character, and they gain experience for killing enemies and discovering new locales, which feeds into the skill tree. The skill tree itself is fairly standard in terms of what it offers. You have minor nodes that increase stats such as melee damage or spell power, and major nodes that offer larger bonuses or effects, such as greater telekinesis force. The main criticism I have about this tree is that you are locked into the path you choose. When you invest your first point, you essentially pick between 4 different paths on the tree. I chose to increase my melee damage, but this came at the cost of not being able to invest in my health or spell power at all through my playthrough, as you now need to path around the entirety of the tree to reach these nodes. Combat in Fatekeeper feels heavy, almost like there is real weight to weapon swings and kicks, but this slightly falls apart as it often feels like your hits do not connect with your target. It is almost as if the perceived distance between you and your target is further away than it seems, as I would often try to kick a shielded enemy only to not have my foot connect with them at all. The game has no difficulty presets, and as such can be very challenging, depending on your personal skill level, and chooses to emphasize this by overwhelming the player at times with many foes at once, often requiring you to keep track of ranged opponents, pelting you with arrows, stones, and poisonous flasks as frontliners simultaneously charge you, which often has you backed into a corner. They have tried to alleviate this problem in their recent balance patch by causing some of the minor enemies, known as shortlings, to now become scared when other shortlings die close to them. You do not have a lot of health initially, unless you invest in it via the tree, making combat even less forgiving when you make mistakes and take hits. You can restore this mid-fight using potions you have brewed with ingredients found throughout the world, but depending on how often you allow yourself to be hit, can result in you not having any resources at all, further encouraging careful engagements and adding to what I would call combat stress, making you want to reload your save if you took too much damage in a fight. Defensively, you can evade attacks, which performed with perfect timing will leave enemies staggered briefly, providing an opening. You can also block, but I personally did not use this at all and relied on evading most attacks. The game encourages you visually to use your environment and surroundings during combat encounters to gain the upper hand, and you may be encouraged to retry certain scenarios upon noticing things such as scaffolding that you can collapse onto enemies or pits that you can kick them into to prevent drawn-out engagements. I think the difficulty of Fatekeeper in its current state will be the major pain point for a lot of people, and a balance pass may be needed if the developers intend to make it more accessible to a wider audience. A couple of other things about the game that I can see people possibly taking issue with include the scarcity of save points, and the fact that you do not fully heal when interacting with them, offset I suppose by the full heal received on a level up, which comes reasonably often in the current iteration of the game. While you are capable of casting spells, you may often end up lacking the mana to deal with the multitude of ranged enemies across encounters, unless you have seriously prepared beforehand with magic potions or are very conservative with your use of spells. The addition of a crossbow or craftable throwing knives, javelins, or bombs might be a good middle ground here. I also noticed that holding an object with telekinesis rapidly drains your mana as well, which makes sense in theory but in practice is very punishing. This brings us to the one other uniting major frustration amongst most players, the first boss. While recent balance patch 0.1.1 does address some of my concerns, I figured I would still recount my experience fighting it. Now if you don't want spoilers, pause the video now and skip ahead. I'll have the time slot here on the screen. The first boss fight takes place in a fairly small arena between yourself and a heavily armoured bull-like demon, or a minotaur as some might think, that is accompanied by a few minor enemies. The difficulty here is twofold in that you can become easily overwhelmed if you are not quick to dispatch the smaller enemies, but also the main boss himself being able to connect his attacks with you in ways that feel almost unfair, as if he is suddenly magnetized to you when he swings. I mentioned previously that the perceived distance between you and your target generally seems to end up being further away than it should be, but this boss completely throws that out of the window and is capable of dashing towards you during his attacks from obscene ranges, which may throw a lot of players off in terms of personal positioning. He also does a ground slam, which you may not immediately think to jump in order to avoid, but can be a struggle to juggle thinking about if he does so while the smaller enemies are still alive. The single most annoying thing the boss did was its bull charge, which if you were too close to when initiated will almost always hit you regardless of distance, and appeared to be unblockable. Despite this, the boss is certainly beatable, but it took me the better half of an hour to do so, which is mostly due to the fact that you have a bit of a run back to the arena each time you died. Figuring out that you could stagger this boss on a perfect dodge was the key for me, as it allowed me to get enough hits in to eventually kill it after familiarizing myself with its moveset, coupled with the odd fireball to supplement my damage. In saying all of this, much of what I had trouble with has again been addressed with the recent balance patch, so you may now have a much better and fewer attempts than I did. In terms of bugs, the only real bug I came across during my time with the game was UI related and seemed linked to skipping cutscenes. The first time I did this, the subtitles from that cutscene remained on my screen and persisted through deaths, reloads, and even returning to the main menu. I had to close the game entirely to resolve this. It happened again when fighting the first boss, where I became unable to skip the cutscene at all after having died to it a few times and not wanting to sit through the dialogue again. This is, however, another issue supposedly resolved by the recent balance patch. Overall, I think what is being offered in the early access version of Fatekeeper is definitely worth the money if you don't mind persevering through the difficulty. It was very reminiscent of an older game called Dark Messiah of Might and Magic for those who have played that before. The developers plan to release the full game around 18 months from now and have stated that they are monitoring feedback, which, after seeing patch 0.1.1 that addresses a lot of pain points already released so quickly, has me hopeful about the cadence and relevance of updates and balance fixes going into the future. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my review. I'll leave links in the description to a couple of other channels that have covered Fatekeeper as well, in case you wanted another opinion. If you found mine helpful, or have some suggestions for how I can improve these reviews, drop me a comment and subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching.